If you don't find this to be one of the sexiest cars on the road, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you've got some serious problems going on. Plenty of owners have had issues with this thing.
If you've done the slightest bit of research on these, you might have seen a bunch of horror stories about their reliability. Look, let's just put the hysteria aside for a second. I'm going to give you some facts.
If you're coming from something like a Golf or a Corolla, this is going to be very impressive. Okay, you know how looks are supposed to be subjective, right? Well, I have a cold, hard fact for you. This is the sexiest Volkswagen they have ever made. However, could it be a bit like when you meet really sexy people? Yes, they're beautiful to look at, but when you get to know them, they can be riddled with issues. See, it seems that quite often when we feature vehicles from the Volkswagen and Audi family, all the wonderful subjective stuff is often let down by poor build quality and just a lack of resilience. So is that the case with the Arteon? Honestly, I certainly hope not, because for full transparency, I adore these cars. But what goes wrong with them? Well, first up, and as is so common with many Volkswagen Group vehicles, the sunroofs. They can be a major concern. Look, it is absolutely critical that all of the drainage channels and the drainage tubes have been cleaned and are clear, because if not, water can build up and eventually it will find its way inside the car and eventually to the electronics, and that can be an absolute bloody nightmare. However, a quick warning, especially on the earlier pre-update models, the little plastic elbows or connectors that join all the plastic tubing together in the drainage channels, they can start to degrade and even they can leak water out. So you might think you have the drainage channels cleared, but then they start leaking from the outside of the drainage tube, and that's going to be a nightmare as well. Also, other owners have claimed that their sunroof can make a whole bunch of creaking and popping and just weird sounds. Now, some claim that this is just, I suppose, the natural tendency when the body actually flexes. Don't know about that. But there are also really bad scenarios where the sunroof itself can get out of alignment. Now, this can cause the whole sunroof to jam up, it won't operate anymore. Sometimes it can even pop out of its channels and just not work at all, and it can cost all of the thousands to fix. Also, especially in hot climates like Australia, check this plastic surround, because there are plenty of reports of it cracking just here. The problem with this is, obviously the roof's cracked, water can leak in. Now look, plenty of these sunroof issues, they have been resolved under warranty, but you've got to remember, these things, they're not going to be covered by a full factory warranty forever. So if the sunroof were to stuff up and the car's not under warranty, what's that going to cost? Well, how long's a piece of string? Now, with the 2020 update, Volkswagen introduced a wagon variant, or a shooting brake if we're going to be fancy. But as cool as fast wagons are, unfortunately, some owners have reported squeaks from the boot in the rear area, especially over bumps. But what could be worse still is that when some owners have complained about these issues to their Volkswagen dealership, the dealership have refused to fix it under warranty because apparently it falls under Volkswagen's acceptable parameters. Now, it is really important to understand that the Arteon shares a whole bunch of components with other Volkswagen models. Actually, for the Australian delivered ones, it's basically a Passat platform with Volkswagen Golf R running gear, then wrapped in an incredibly sexy body. But the only problem with that is that therefore it means it can share quite a few problems that we have seen in Passats and Golfs, like electrical gremlins and just bits of trim issues. So if you're buying one of these, just make sure that everything that's powered by electricity actually works, and make sure nothing's falling off it. However, it is important to understand that we found the reported problems with the Arteon are much less than what we found on the Passat, although that could be to do with the fact that they sold far fewer of these than they did with the Passat. Actually, fun fact, at one point the Passat outsold the Arteon 13-1, which might explain why Volkswagen no longer makes them. Now, if you're watching this internationally, you might be wondering why we haven't mentioned all of the other engines and trim specs. That's because here in Australia, we only received this, the 2-litre turbo, in 2 different trim specs. But no matter where you're watching this from, or what trim spec or model you're looking at, unfortunately, owners have reported that the overall build quality for the exterior can be a bit hit and miss. And look, we totally understand that in this video, it might give you the impression that an Arteon is about to fall apart at any moment, but that is simply not the case, because when you read through the owners groups and forums, there are thousands of reports of faultless ownership experiences. Just that some other owners haven't been so lucky. Speaking of being lucky, let's talk about what these are currently asking on the used market, because I tell you what, bargains can be had. Locally, the 206 TSI R-Line, easily the most popular model in the entire range, retailed here in Australia brand new for about $75,000. These days, you're looking at anywhere from about $25,000 to about $65,000. Compare that to a Volkswagen Golf R of an equivalent sort of age and vintage, all that sort of stuff. Brand new, they were asking $10,000 less than these, but on the used market, they're often asking up to $15,000 more. And remember, this was pretty much the flagship Volkswagen car of the time, so you get more features and equipment. It is slightly larger, it's just as practical, it has pretty much exactly the same running gear, so on paper, this thing surely makes way more sense than a Golf R. That is, unless you bought one brand new, because in that case, you may have lost maybe 65% of its value. We're terribly sorry. But if you are shopping on the used market, yeah, bargains can be had. Now look, if you don't find this to be one of the sexiest cars on the road, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you've got some serious problems going on. I mean, how can you not find this car just so attractive? This whole angry front end. I love how the headlight is integrated into the entire front fascia. All of these really strong horizontal lines everywhere. The overall shape and the way that the shape works in the size envelope is just fantastic. But then you get to the shooting brake. Oh my God, this thing, like, I love it. Stick a fork in me, I am done. That is one of the hottest cars on the road. Also, and look, I'm sure I'm not alone here, but don't you think this looks so much more expensive than it is? You gotta remember, you can get these from about 25,000 bucks. It still looks like it's worth around about $75,000. That's gotta be a good thing, yeah? But I tell you what, as wonderful as the Arteon is to look at, lower it just a smidge and put on some quality aftermarket wheels and somehow it looks even better. Actually, you know what? This can also solve one of the other complaints owners have had. It's the fact that the optional 20-inch wheels on the very thin rubber, they don't play nicely with Australian roads. The ride quality is really harsh and they can be susceptible to damage from bloody potholes. Plenty of owners recommend fitting a smaller 19-inch rim, which I think is the standard rim that comes on it, with thicker rubber, and that should solve some of the problems. Also, when it comes to brakes like the pads and rotors, before you go buying the OEM parts, listen to the owners, because plenty of them recommend checking out the aftermarket scene. Quite often, aftermarket parts will save you money, they can last longer than the OEM items, and they can perform just as well. Sometimes they can even exceed in performance. Now, our hot tip when it comes to aftermarket parts is to check out our mates at Automotive Superstore. If it's aftermarket wheels, suspension components, performance parts, dash cams, infotainment systems, speakers, even four-wheel drive accessories, they have over 400,000 different parts and accessories. So chances are, whatever you need, they're gonna have it. They're a great Aussie company. Why not join the over 500,000 other happy customers by checking them out via the link below. Now, did you notice how I mentioned infotainment upgrades just then? That's because it might be a requirement in here. Plenty of owners have had issues with this thing. Owners have reported wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto issues, even problems with them dropping out even when they're plugged in, Bluetooth connection issues, the screen locking up, or just becoming impossibly slow to use. Now, restarting the car or giving the infotainment system a software update often does fix the problem. However, sometimes even that doesn't work. Actually, the same applies with all of the interior electronics in here. There can be gremlins. Quite often they fix themselves, other times they don't. But back to the infotainment system for a second. A few owners have complained about actually using it. See, on the pre-update cars like this, there's no control knobs. It's just a touch screen. Although you can swipe it into different directions, which is cool. But thanks to people like me wanting more knobs in their lives, the post-update model does come with knobs. And it's almost like Volkswagen have admitted fault here because they're returning to having more knobs in the car. Yay for more knobs in your life. Although, no matter what iteration of infotainment system the Arteon comes with, honestly, it's never going to be quite as good as the BMW 3 Series and its iDrive technology. That, for me, is still the best infotainment system out there. Also, just like the exterior, it does seem like these interiors can be a bit hit and miss in terms of fit and finish and quality. Some owners have reported absolutely rock-solid interiors, exactly like Andy with this particular car, but other owners have had issues with plenty of creaking and plastic cracking sounds or squeaking, or even the air vent kind of flaps here just falling down or becoming rattly, or even the fans in the air conditioning system also becoming rattly. Now, interestingly, it seems that a lot of these issues can be quite weather dependent. Basically, if it's really hot outside, the interiors can become a bit grumpy. A bit like Sam behind the camera right now. And then in terms of the interior's resilience to actual use on a daily basis, this car has over 110,000 kilometers on it. Andy uses it to ferry the kids to and from school, and uses it for work all the time. And the interior, I think, is holding up really well. The leather still feels quite soft and it's not marking. Even some of the gloss black plastic around here, a few little scratches, that's to be expected. Steering wheel, it's lost a bit of its texture. But again, some owners have had great dealings with resilience. Other owners complain that it doesn't hold up all that well. Also, check any of the sort of satin chrome bits of plastic and metal finish, because that can get a bit discolored and even start to flake off a little bit. But again, in here, it hasn't. Also, while the materials in here that Volkswagen have used, it's all very, very nice, I just don't think it feels quite as premium as, say, a Genesis G70 or a Lexus IS or even a higher spec Mazda 6. And then from an ergonomics standpoint, typical for Volkswagen here, complete perfection. There's so much adjustability. The seats themselves are ultra comfortable and supportive, and just, I love the way you feel and sit in a Volkswagen. But a few people have complained that the overall design in here is pretty much the same as you'd get in a Passat. I personally don't think that's a bad thing, because the Passat has a beautiful interior, so just stop whinging. And then as far as living with the interior in terms of practicality, not too bad. Under the slidey trapdoor, you've got a couple of cup holders there. They will hold a small pretentious coffee like the ones I like, because I've got little fingers to grip onto them. This is specifically designed to collect dust, because you can remove that bit and go and clean it. You've got under the squeaky armrest, a little cubby bin here with your auxiliary inputs and USBs and stuff. Under this little slidey trapdoor, you do have a wireless charging pad, although it's only, my phone can barely fit in it, and mine's not one of the big iPhones either. If you've got a larger phone, no chance of that fitting. Okay, size glove box there. Door bins that are felt lined to keep your cold drinks nice and warm. Got a little spot in here for your garage door remote and other nicks and knacks, also felt lined so nothing rattles around. Nothing under the seats, no sunglasses holder there, nothing there. It's okay for practicality up front. Also, being one of Volkswagen's flagship models, it is absolutely loaded with kit. 360-degree cameras, self-parking functions, tri-zone climate control, the full suite of active and autonomous safety tech, even massage seats, plus a premium Dyne Audio sound system was available, and this one has it, and it sounds amazing. However, as we mentioned, just make sure that all of the equipment and features actually work. Chances are it will, but you don't want to go buying a car only to find afterwards that things in here are broken. This actually goes for some of the active features as well, like the rain sensing wipers. Make sure you throw some water on it, and do they actually activate and wipe, and do they shudder and squeak or leave any gaps on the windscreen? Plus, if they're one of the dozens of dodgy aftermarket wiper blades out there, they're going to be a nightmare to even pick which ones to get, and they're going to be bloody pain in the ass to fit. You know what? Just hit the link below and get yourself a set of Wipertech wiper blades, because not only will you avoid all of these pitfalls, you'll end up getting 15% off and free express shipping. Although, if you lend us your car to film, just like the legend Andy has with his Arteon, you won't have to do any of that, because we're going to give you a set for free as a thank you present. If you would like your car featured, make sure you message us on the socials, or just chuck a comment down below. Now, the back seat of the Arteon, I'm exactly 25 centimeters taller than somebody that likes to get her party on pink. Get it? Arteon, party on, because she's saying, get the party started. Honestly, so much room for activities back here. Cop the amount of legroom, good amount of footroom as well. The seats are so comfortable and just the right amount of supportive for some fun corners. I assumed that my head would bang up against the roof because of the wonderful design with the kind of coupe back, but it doesn't. My hair is just slightly touching it, but I've got slightly tall hair. Little thing as well, I've just noticed on so many Volkswagen models, this section here they don't normally trim. It's normally just, you know, the color of the car, the metal from outside inside. But on the Arteon, they've actually added trim sections, so it just feels a little bit more premium. I can't get over how wonderful this backseat area is. Top notch. Even in terms of features and practicality, really good. You've got your own climate control settings and air vents. You've got a little power outlet there, mat pockets on the backs of the seats, pull down armrest here with a specific pretentious coffee holder. You'd easily fit an espresso or a double ristretto in there, as well as your other two normal cup holders. And door bins that are felt lined again, but they're in a position that you can actually get to them even if you've got legs. And then in the boot, this is another highlight of the car. It's a lift back exactly like a Kia Stinger. So you've got huge amounts of space and the opening aperture is massive. Obviously you get even more space when the seats are down, but as cool as the wagon is to look at, a few owners have complained that because of the roof height, it's maybe not as tall as you'd expect, so maybe the wagon actually isn't that much more practical than the liftback. And when it comes to driving, unfortunately, quite a few owners have some complaints. The first one being Volkswagen's stupid throttle mapping. Now, this seems to be most prevalent when you're either in the standard or the comfort drive mode settings, and also between 40 to 70 kilometers an hour, which, let's be honest, that's where you're going to be driving the car most of the time, unless you drive on an autobahn all the time. Basically, the throttle mapping isn't linear, so you flex your right foot a little bit and nothing really happens until you really sink your foot in. And this lack of responsiveness can be really frustrating, can actually remove any confidence you have from the car, because just say you're going for a gap in traffic or even trying to get out of a dangerous situation, you start to accelerate, but nothing happens. Now, fortunately, there are some solutions to this. Plenty of owners highly recommend fitting a throttle controller or getting a VCDS tune done. Actually, the VCDS tune, that can unlock a whole bunch of other features with the car as well. Next up, typical for a dual clutch transmission, they can feel a bit clunky and hesitant, especially at around town speeds. Up to speed, they're fantastic, but this is just the nature of the beast. It's just what they do. And also, typical for Volkswagen, the steering really lacks any feel or nuance whatsoever, even when you're in the more dynamic modes. And you know what? Quite a few owners blame the numb steering for the car feeling like it doesn't have any character or personality. Actually, this is something I've noticed in a host of fast Volkswagens. They're so incredibly competent that they just lack any character. And also, while the Arteon is, look, undoubtedly very, very quick, they're potentially absolute weapons when they're tuned. It is a really good example that fast doesn't necessarily equate to fun. But then on the flip side of performance, this also might not feel quite as premium or as refined as you might expect, especially in terms of ride quality. Something like a Genesis G70 or even a Kia Stinger, in terms of just a feeling of refinement, I think is better than this. Also, while we're on the topic of suspension, quite a few owners have complained about some just noises and creaks and weird sounds coming from the suspension, even though nothing is mechanically wrong with it. And another complaint from owners, and I totally agree even in this car, the safety system calibrations. If you come up to even a slight incline or a speed hump, you get all the alerts banging off at you. It's just all too sensitive. But look, please don't get us wrong. This is still an utterly lovely car to drive. If you're coming from something like a Golf or a Corolla, this is going to be very impressive. And even when it comes to just living with it on a daily basis, yes, it's a big car, but it doesn't feel too large. Even when it comes to parking, because of all the technology on board, parking is a breeze, dealing with traffic is pretty easy. Funnily enough too, normally coupe designs like this can really have a negative impact on your sight lines out of the car, but in this, it's actually quite good. Okay, out the back, it's a little bit tight to see, but overall, it's really easy to live with. And as we mentioned, with the right mods, there is a whole other level of potential just waiting to be unlocked. However, sometimes when you enhance what a car can do, it can have a negative impact on reliability. So mechanically, what's the story with these? I can't tell you, unfortunately, because I'm not a qualified mechanic. But you know who is? It's Jim.
The most common and somewhat pricey problem you might see is the water pump and thermostat module. Look, these fail early. In some cases, they can start leaking at about 40,000 kilometres. Look, it's a pretty common problem if we just think of it more in terms of regular maintenance. Pretty much the way we used to treat timing belts, that's how you look at these water pumps. And when it comes time to do that water pump, and eventually you will, don't insist on a genuine Volkswagen one. We're seeing that some of the aftermarket ones actually outlast the genuine ones, and they're cheaper too. These engines do occasionally have issues with their breather system, the PCV system. When that fails, you can sometimes hear it sucking away and you get a few fault codes. That doesn't help the valves coking up on these. They're direct injection, and all direct injection engines coke up the valves, but if you have a PCV issue on these, it makes it worse. Now, if that carbon buildup on the valves gets too bad, it just robs you of a whole bunch of efficiency and power, and you can have it chemically cleaned or walnut blasted. Not a huge deal. And if you are having that cleaned, a good time to do it is when you are getting the water pump done, because you have to take that inlet manifold off to do it. So yeah, kill two birds there. Don't actually kill two birds, that was just a saying. The purge valve on these, that's the valve that just sucks the fuel fumes out of the tank and just burns it through the engine. They occasionally fail. When they do, it just logs a whole bunch of air-fuel ratio fault codes. The good news here, it's a pretty cheap and easy fix. The timing chain on these engines, Unlike the earlier generations of this engine, in these, it's actually not a common fail point. They're pretty good. However, if it's had a lousy service history, they can stretch and they can be problematic, but generally they're pretty good. And like most Volkswagen Audi group, engine bays, there's a whole bunch of plastics in there, like the water pump, and as they age, all the heat cycles just make them brittle and they tend to break and leak. So that is something you'll have to look out for in the future. Now let's talk about the DSGs. They have a pretty bad reputation, a lot of failures early on. Look, the truth is, in these, if they've been well maintained, if they've had a service at some point in their life, they're typically pretty good. It's a good idea to make sure if there are any outstanding recalls, just do a VIN search, that'll quickly tell you the answer there. As for the all-wheel drive models, the rear coupling is a Haldex coupling. Now if that's serviced and it has the right oil on time, typically, again, unlikely to have any issues with that. One last thing, these engines in some cases do burn a bit of oil. The thing here is it's really difficult to know if you're looking at an oil burner or not. And even if you get a pre-purchase inspection, you can't always tell. Look, the best way to get around that and mitigate the risk of getting an oil burner, it helps if the car has just had an absolutely flawless and well-documented service history. In fact, servicing here is the key to survival. These engines do not like neglect like some other brands. If they're neglected, they will fail.
Okay, so do we think you should buy a used Arteon? Okay, well look, as long as you've got a few $1,000s set aside for the inevitable maintenance the thing's going to require, thanks to pretty serious amounts of depreciation, yeah, we think you should. Yes, there are other cars like the Genesis G70 and the Lexus IS and even the Kia Stinger that offer arguably higher build quality, stronger residuals and an overall more cohesive package. But equivalent models to the Arteon will often be asking thousands of dollars more. And it's the Arteon's value for money that makes it a clear winner for us. Because when you compare this to an equivalent Audi or a Volkswagen Golf R, these things tick so many of the same boxes for so much less cash. Obviously, avoid any abused examples, stick with models that have a meticulous service history, and make sure you get a pre-purchase inspection carried out. And we'd maybe avoid the more expensive models at the top of the food chain because look, those prices will likely plummet in the years to come. But if the Arteon you're looking at ticks all of those critical boxes, yeah, it can be a really great thing. And just think of it this way, even if it does break down, at least you've got a stunning art installment you can look at while you're waiting for a tow truck. However, if you can stretch the budget a little bit more, we do highly recommend checking out one of these before you buy one of these. But if you already own an Arteon, can we ask a favor? Can you let us know in the comments below what your ownership experience has been like? Because that will help other people that are potentially looking at buying one.
Is
the compressor going off? That was me. This might make bloopers.
I just did.
It proves that we're not on a green screen. It proves that this is an actual workshop.